I knew something was off the moment I pulled into my driveway. My front yard looked like a war zone, piles of broken furniture, bags of trash, and what appeared to be pieces of a dismantled swing set were scattered across my lawn. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just some random act of vandalism. This was deliberate, and I had a pretty good idea who was behind it. Karren Tillman, the HOA president from hell. I slammed my truck door shut and marched toward her house, which was 3 doors down from mine. Before I even reached her driveway, she stepped out onto her pristine porch, arms folded, that smug expression plastered across her face. "Ah, Christopher," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You're home. I was just about to send you a notice." "A notice?" I barked, gesturing at the disaster zone that used to be my front yard. "You dumped all this trash on my lawn, Karren," she gasped dramatically, hand on her chest like I had just accused her of murder. "Excuse me? That is absolutely not true." I exhaled sharply, trying to keep my temper in check. "Karren, don't play games with me. I have cameras. I bet if I check the footage, I'll see exactly who did this." Her expression faltered for just a second before she recovered. "Well," she sniffed, "if there's trash on your property, then it's your responsibility to clean it up. The HOA has very strict rules about maintaining the appearance of our neighborhood." I clenched my fists. "So let me get this straight. You dump garbage on my property, then you're going to fine me for it." She smiled sweetly. "I don't make the rules." "Oh, but she did. And she loved using them to make my life miserable. Ever since I moved into this neighborhood, she had been on my case about everything. My truck was too big, my grass wasn't trimmed to her exact specifications, my mailbox was the wrong shade of gray. But this was a new low. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. "I'll clean it up," I said, my jaw tight. "But I hope you're ready, Karren." "For what?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I didn't answer. I just turned on my heel and walked away. Because what she didn't know, what she was about to find out in a very public and humiliating way, was that I had just been promoted to head of city code enforcement, and that meant, effective immediately, I was her boss. I didn't waste any time. The moment I stepped inside my house, I went straight to my laptop and pulled up the security footage from my front yard cameras. Sure enough, there she was, Karren and 2 of her lackeys, dragging trash bags, broken furniture, and even what looked like an old toilet onto my lawn. They were laughing, chatting like this was just another day of HOA tyranny. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. She really thought she could get away with this. Not this time. The next morning, I arrived at City Hall earlier than usual. My new position as head of code enforcement came with a lot of responsibilities, but today, I had a very specific task in mind. I pulled up all the documentation on Karren's HOA, the bylaws, complaints filed against them, and, most importantly, violations they had been cited for in the past. There were plenty. Illegal fines, failure to maintain community spaces, misuse of HOA funds. It was all there, buried in reports that had never been followed up on. I could already see the pattern. Karren had been running this HOA like her personal kingdom for years, bullying homeowners, making up rules as she went, and using the funds for who knows what. I wasn't just going to stop her from harassing me. I was going to dismantle her entire operation. By noon, I had everything I needed. I grabbed my folder of evidence and headed out. When I pulled onto my street, I wasn't surprised to see Karren standing in my front yard, arms crossed as she spoke to a man in a polo shirt, an HOA inspector. She was already trying to fine me for the disaster she had created. I parked my truck and got out, walking straight toward them. "Christopher," Karren said, her voice all sugary sweetness. "You still haven't cleaned up this mess. That's a violation of HOA regulations." I didn't even acknowledge her. Instead, I turned to the inspector. "I hope you're not planning to write me up for this." The man hesitated, looking between me and Karren. "Well," the HOA reported. I pulled out my phone and opened the security footage. Because I have video proof that this trash came from Karren and her friends. I pressed play, letting the footage speak for itself. The inspector's face paled. Karren's smile froze. That's not. This is out of context." I turned to her, my voice calm. "Out of context? Karren, you and your HOA board illegally dumped waste onto private property. That's a city violation. And guess who's in charge of enforcing city violations now?" She blinked, not understanding at first. Then the realization hit her. You're in code enforcement?" I pulled out the folder I had prepared earlier. "That's right. And I've been going through records. It looks like your HOA has been racking up violations for years, but nothing was ever done about it. I handed the inspector a copy. That changes today. The inspector skimmed the pages, his expression turning serious. These are serious infractions? Karren's face went red. This is ridiculous. You can't just target the HOA out of spite. I looked her right in the eyes. This isn't spite, Karren. This is accountability. She opened her mouth to argue, but the inspector was already making notes. I'll have to escalate this. There's enough here for a full audit of the HOA's finances and practices. Her confidence cracked. An audit? That's not necessary. I'd say it's very necessary, I interrupted. Especially since your HOA has been collecting fines for made-up infractions while ignoring actual maintenance issues. The inspector nodded. We'll be sending an official notice. If irregularities are found, the HOA board could face serious consequences. Karren's breathing turned shallow. You can't do this. I tilted my head. I didn't do anything, Karren. You did. She turned on the inspector. You don't have to listen to him. He's biased. The inspector frowned. The evidence speaks for itself. If you really have nothing to hide, then an audit shouldn't be a problem. She was completely trapped. I turned to leave but paused. Oh, and Karren? I gestured at my yard. You and your board have 24 hours to clean this up. If it's not gone by then, I'll be issuing fines for illegal dumping. And I'll make sure they're enforced. Her hands clenched into fists, but she had no response. I walked away, leaving her standing there, speechless. By the next morning, every last piece of trash was gone. But Karren's problems? They were just beginning. The fallout from the audit hit faster than even I expected. Within 2 days, city investigators were crawling through the HOA's financial records and the neighborhood was buzzing with speculation. Karren had been unusually quiet, no passive-aggressive emails, no surprise inspections of my property. It was the calm before the storm and I knew she was scrambling. I didn't have to wait long to see just how desperate she was getting. Late one evening, just as I was locking up my truck after a long day at City Hall, I noticed movement near my front porch. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I saw the figure standing in the shadows, arms crossed, waiting. Karren. I sighed. Trespassing now? You really don't know when to quit. She stepped forward into the dim glow of the porch light, her face tight with barely concealed frustration. We need to talk. I leaned against my truck, arms folded. About what? How your little empire is crumbling. Her lips thinned. You're making a mistake. I chuckled. That's funny. I was going to say the same to you. She took a deep breath, clearly fighting to keep her composure. The HOA is the backbone of this community. You don't understand the kind of work that goes into maintaining it. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like most of that work involved fining people for nonsense and pocketing the money. Her jaw tightened. There are explanations for everything in those records. Great. Then you won't mind explaining them to the investigators. She exhaled sharply. You're blowing this out of proportion. If you just drop this, we can make a deal. That caught my attention. Not because I was interested, but because it told me just how desperate she really was. A deal, huh? What kind of deal? She hesitated, then took a step closer, lowering her voice. I can make your life easier. No more fines. No more complaints about your truck or your yard. In fact, I could even approve that shed you wanted to build in the back. I let out a short laugh. You think I care about some backyard shed? I care about accountability. And I care about stopping you from bullying this neighborhood. Her expression darkened. You're not a hero, Christopher. You're just a guy with a grudge. I shook my head. No, I'm a guy who got sick of watching you abuse your power. And now that I have the authority to do something about it, I will. She stared at me for a long moment, then scoffed. Fine. Have it your way. But you've just made yourself an enemy. I pushed off my truck and stepped toward her. Karren, you've been my enemy since the day I moved in. The difference now is that you don't have the upper hand anymore. She turned on her heel and stalked off into the night. I had no doubt she was already planning her next move. The next morning, she made good on her threat. By the time I stepped out to grab my morning coffee, I saw them HOA board members, clipboard in hand, surrounding my property like vultures. They were measuring my driveway, inspecting my mailbox, even scrutinizing the spacing of my fence posts. I set my coffee down and walked over. What's this? One of them, a wiry man named Todd, cleared his throat. Routine inspection. I nodded. And this has nothing to do with Karren's little grudge. They exchanged glances but said nothing. I let out a slow breath, then pulled out my phone. Well, since you're all so interested in property compliance, let me show you something. I scrolled through my photos, then held up the screen. This is the HOA-maintained community park. Notice the broken benches, the overgrown grass, the playground equipment that hasn't been repaired in years. Todd swallowed hard. That's not the focus of this inspection. I smiled. It is now. As head of code enforcement, I'm officially launching a full review of all HOA-managed properties. One of the board members, a woman in her 60s, paled. You can't do that. I nodded. Actually, I can. And I just did. They scattered like roaches. By the end of the week, the city had issued multiple citations against the HOA for neglecting community spaces, misusing funds, and failing to uphold their own regulations. It was the kind of public embarrassment Karren couldn't ignore. The final blow came when the audit results were released. At the emergency HOA meeting, the room was packed with homeowners, all eager to hear just how bad things really were. Karren sat at the front, her usual air of superiority gone, replaced with a rigid, defensive posture. The auditor, a no-nonsense woman from the city's financial department, stood at the podium. Our investigation has uncovered serious discrepancies in the HOA's financial records. She flipped through her notes. Over $50,000 in unaccounted funds, excessive fines issued without proper justification, and multiple violations of both city and state HOA regulations. The crowd murmured angrily. A man from the back called out, "Where did the money go, Karren?" She stood abruptly. I have always acted in the best interest of this community. I leaned forward. Then why is the playground falling apart? Why are the sidewalks cracked? Where did the money go? Her hands clenched at her sides. This is a witch hunt. The auditor ignored her. As of today, the city is recommending the immediate dissolution of this HOA's leadership and the appointment of an interim board until proper elections can be held. The room erupted in cheers. Karren's face twisted in horror. You can't do this. I stood. Actually, they can. And they just did. She stormed out, shoving past people as she went. By the next morning, she had officially resigned. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood finally felt free. With Karren gone, the neighborhood was finally breathing again. The oppressive grip of her HOA reign had loosened, and for the first time, people felt comfortable stepping outside without the fear of receiving some ridiculous violation notice tucked under their door. But while Karren had resigned, her mess remained. The audit had revealed a financial disaster, and now the community had to pick up the pieces. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The interim HOA board, made up of homeowners who actually cared, had asked for my input on how to correct years of mismanagement. I agreed to help, but my main priority was making sure Karren faced real consequences. She had resigned to avoid further scrutiny, but I knew she wasn't out of the game yet. People like her never walked away willingly. And sure enough, it wasn't long before I saw her again. I pulled into my driveway one evening and barely had time to shut off my truck before I saw her standing by the curb, arms crossed. She was dressed differently than usual, no polished blazer or designer handbag. Instead, she wore a plain button-up and jeans, trying to appear casual. But her expression was anything but relaxed. I stepped out and shut the door behind me, taking my time. She didn't like waiting. She spoke first, her voice clipped. "We need to talk." I leaned against the truck, watching her. "You sure about that? Last time we talked, you stormed out of a meeting." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't about personal grievances." I nodded slowly. "No, this is about the fact that you lost control and you don't know what to do with yourself." She stiffened, but I didn't give her a chance to respond. "What do you want, Karren?" Her jaw tightened. "I want to help fix this." I raised an eyebrow. "Help? You mean fix the financial disaster you caused?" She didn't flinch at the accusation, which told me she had rehearsed this. "The HOA is in chaos. People are panicking. I know the ins and outs of how things were run. I can help the new board transition." I studied her for a moment. "You're trying to weasel your way back in." She shook her head. "That's not what I'm doing." I pushed off the truck and took a step closer. "You don't get to play savior after you spent years wrecking this place. You stole money, bullied homeowners, and now that you've been exposed, you want a second chance? That's not how this works. Her nostrils flared. I didn't steal money. I tilted my head. Funny. The audit says otherwise. She took a steady breath. I made mistakes. But if you let this new board run things without experience, the whole HOA will collapse. I laughed under my breath. That's the best thing I've heard all day. She blinked, clearly not expecting that response. I continued. This HOA doesn't need to function the way you ran it. People don't need to be terrorized with bogus fines or have their money siphoned into mystery expenses. If it collapses, as you put it, then maybe that's what needs to happen. Her mask slipped for a brief second, and I saw it, the panic. The realization that she had truly lost control. She tried one last time. You're making a mistake. If you don't have someone who knows how to handle this, the whole neighborhood will suffer. I met her gaze. No, Karren. The neighborhood suffered under you. Now, they get to rebuild without you interfering. She stared at me, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. I watched her go, knowing this wasn't the last I'd hear from her. And I was right. The next week, the city's legal team reached out to me. Turns out Karren hadn't just been misusing HOA funds, she'd been using them for personal expenses. Luxury dinners, spa visits, even payments to a landscaping company that never did any actual work. The evidence was damning. I immediately forwarded the findings to the interim board. They wasted no time filing a lawsuit on behalf of the homeowners. The fallout was brutal. Word spread fast, and soon, neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak up were coming forward with their own stories. Karren had fined a retired couple for having a garden gnome, forced a single mother to repaint her house twice in 1 year for not meeting aesthetic guidelines, and even attempted to annex a small patch of land from someone's backyard to expand a community pathway, all while using HOA dues to fund her personal lifestyle. The lawsuit gained traction, and before long, Karren was served with legal papers. She tried to fight it, of course, claimed it was all a misunderstanding, but the evidence was overwhelming. The final nail in the coffin came when the city officially ruled that the HOA's financial mismanagement constituted fraud. She faced not only civil penalties but criminal charges as well. At the final hearing, she sat at the defendant's table, her usual confidence completely shattered. Gone was the smug, untouchable woman who had terrorized the neighborhood for years. In her place was someone who had lost everything. The judge ruled in favor of the homeowners, ordering Karren to pay restitution for the misused funds. She was also barred from ever holding a position in any HOA again. As I left the courthouse, I spotted her sitting on a bench outside, staring at the ground. She didn't look up as I passed by. I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. Back in the neighborhood, things had changed. The new HOA board, now made up of people who actually cared, started undoing the damage Karren had caused. They removed unnecessary restrictions, refunded unfair fines, and actually used the community funds for the benefit of the residents. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a place people wanted to live in, not just a place they were trapped in. And as for me, I finally built that backyard shed. No permits, no fines, no HOA president breathing down my neck. Just peace. Something Karren would never have again. With Karren out of the picture and the lawsuit settled, the neighborhood had finally started to feel like a community again. People were repainting their homes in colors they actually liked, kids were riding their bikes without fear of being fined for leaving them on the sidewalk, and for the first time in years, there were actual block parties that didn't require an approval process signed in triplicate. But just because Karren was gone didn't mean the damage she had done had magically disappeared. The HOA's financial mess was still being untangled, and the new board was struggling to make sense of all the missing funds, unpaid maintenance contracts, and questionable transactions. Even with the restitution payments she had been ordered to make, it wasn't enough to cover years of neglect. I had kept my distance from the inner workings of the new HOA, happy to let the new leadership handle things. But when I got a call from Mark, one of the interim board members, I knew it wasn't going to be good news. He wasted no time getting to the point. The HOA's insurance policy had lapsed under Karren's leadership, meaning that any major repairs needed to come directly out of the community fund, which was already drained. On top of that, the city had flagged several violations on HOA-managed properties, which meant hefty fines if they weren't addressed soon. I met with the board that evening in the newly repurposed clubhouse, which was no longer being used as Karren's personal headquarters. The mood was tense as they laid out the situation in full. The park's drainage system was failing, the perimeter fences were rotting, and the HOA was barely bringing in enough dues to cover the most basic maintenance. Mark ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his voice. We're trying to do this the right way, but every time we think we've made progress, another one of Karren's mistakes pops up. Linda, a retired teacher who had taken over as treasurer, pushed a thick stack of papers toward me. These are the outstanding invoices that were never paid. Landscaping, street lights, pool maintenance. Some of these companies have stopped servicing us because we owe them so much. I flipped through the pages, my jaw tightening at the sheer negligence. Karren hadn't just stolen money, she had let the entire infrastructure of the community fall apart. I leaned back in my chair, considering the options. We can't just raise dues. People are already frustrated with how their money was misused. If we try to collect more, we'll lose what little trust we've gained. Mark nodded. Exactly. We need a way to bring in money without making homeowners feel like they're being punished for Karren's actions. I exhaled slowly. Then we need to get creative. Over the next few days, I pulled some strings at City Hall. There were grants available for neighborhood revitalization, but they weren't easy to secure. I had to make a solid case that the HOA was under new leadership and that the funds would be used transparently. With the help of the board, we put together a proposal outlining exactly how we planned to restore the community. We gathered testimonies from homeowners about the damages caused by Karren's leadership and included a detailed budget plan for how the money would be allocated. When I finally presented it to the city council, I could tell they weren't expecting such a well-organized appeal. They had seen plenty of HOAs mismanage funds before, but our plan showed a clear path to recovery. After 2 weeks of deliberation, we got the approval. The city awarded us a grant large enough to cover the most urgent repairs. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was the break we needed. With the funds secured, we wasted no time getting to work. Contractors were hired, repairs began, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood started looking like the well-maintained community it was meant to be. But just when things seemed to be turning around, Karren reappeared. I was coming home late one evening when I saw her standing outside my house, leaning against a rental car. Her expensive SUV had been seized as part of the restitution payments, and she no longer had her usual air of superiority. Instead, she looked tired, but there was still that sharpness in her eyes. I stopped at the curb, not bothering to hide my annoyance. "You lost, Karren?" She straightened. "I heard about the grant." I crossed my arms. "And?" She hesitated, then exhaled. "You're undoing everything I built." I laughed. "Everything you built? You mean the corruption, the fines, the missing money?" "Yeah, we're undoing all of that." Her expression darkened. "You don't understand. Running an HOA isn't just about keeping people happy. It's about control. Without structure, things fall apart." I shook my head. Structure isn't the same as dictatorship. And let's be honest, Karren, this was never about maintaining the neighborhood. It was about maintaining your power. She looked away for a moment, then back at me. "You think they'll be able to keep it together without me? The minute something goes wrong, they'll come crawling back, begging for leadership." I studied her for a moment. "You really don't get it, do you? No one's coming back to you. They're moving forward. Without you." Her jaw tightened, but she had no response. I took a step closer. "You had your chance, Karren. You could have built something great, but instead you ruled through fear. And now you have nothing." She clenched her fists, but there was no fight left in her. Without another word, she turned, got into her rental, and drove off into the night. I didn't watch her go. There was nothing left to see. Over the next few months, the neighborhood continued to heal. The playground was rebuilt, the fences repaired, and for the first time in years, homeowners actually attended HOA meetings voluntarily. People were talking, sharing ideas, and working together. And Karren? She was just another cautionary tale. A warning of what happened when power was abused. As I stood on my freshly repaired porch, watching kids play in the park that had once been neglected, I felt something I hadn't in years. Pride. Not just in what I had done, but in what we had all accomplished together. The neighborhood wasn't just recovering. It was thriving. With the neighborhood finally recovering, I settled back into a sense of normalcy. The HOA was now in the hands of people who genuinely cared, and the toxic atmosphere Karren had cultivated was gone. People felt comfortable again, free from the constant fear of fabricated fines and arbitrary rules. But even with all the progress we had made, I knew better than to think Karren was truly finished. Someone like her didn't just disappear quietly. And I was right. Rumors started circulating that she was trying to find a way back into power, not in our neighborhood but in another one. A friend of mine who worked in a neighboring city's municipal office gave me a heads up that she had applied for a position on a different HOA board, one that was struggling to fill vacancies. It was a smaller community, mostly retirees, and they had no idea what kind of person was trying to weasel her way in. I wasn't about to let her start the cycle all over again. After work one evening, I took a drive over to the neighborhood in question. It was only a 15-minute ride, and as I rolled through, I could already tell why Karren had targeted it. The community was quiet, well-maintained, but clearly lacking a strong leadership presence. The HOA board likely didn't have the energy or knowledge to push back against someone like Karren. She could easily manipulate them into giving her power and then tighten her grip just like she had done in our neighborhood. I pulled up to the small clubhouse where they were holding their board meetings and walked in. A handful of residents were gathered, some chatting over coffee while others studied documents spread across folding tables. I spotted an older gentleman reviewing a stack of applications, and I approached. After introducing myself, I got straight to the point. I told him about Karren's history, the financial mismanagement, the lawsuits, and the way she had abused her authority. I didn't embellish anything. I didn't need to. The facts alone were enough to make his eyes widen in alarm. He called over the other board members, and I laid everything out for them. It didn't take much convincing. The moment they realized what kind of predator they were dealing with, they unanimously agreed to reject her application. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to make sure Karren knew that she wasn't going to get away with this. The next morning, I made a call to a local journalist who had covered HOA corruption cases before. I provided her with all the public records, the details of Karren's fraudulent activities, and the new attempt she had made to regain a position of power. The article published 2 days later, and it was brutal. The headline alone made my morning coffee taste sweeter. Disgraced HOA president attempts to seize control in new neighborhood residents pushback. Karren's name was now permanently tied to her past actions, and any community that did even a basic search on her would know exactly who she was. Her days of unchecked authority were officially over. I thought that would be the last of it. But Karren wasn't done yet. 2 weeks later, I came home to find my driveway blocked by a rental van. It was an eyesore, parked at an awkward angle with the driver's side door left open. As I stepped out of my truck, I saw her standing beside it, arms crossed. I had to give her credit, she was persistent. I walked over, keeping my expression neutral. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You ruined my life." I sighed. "No, Karren. You did that yourself." She shook her head, her voice sharp. "I had control. I had respect. Now I can't even get a position in a second-rate HOA because of you." I shrugged. Maybe people just don't want a corrupt dictator running their community. Her hands balled into fists, but she forced herself to stay composed. "I don't care what you think. I'm going to rebuild. I'll find a way back." I studied her for a moment. "That's the problem, Karren. You don't know how to exist without controlling people. You think leadership means power, but real leadership means responsibility. And you've never been responsible for anything except your own self-interest." She scoffed. "You think you're better than me? You think you're some kind of hero?" I shook my head. "No. I'm just a guy who got tired of watching you walk all over people." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "This isn't over." I leaned in slightly, meeting her gaze. "Yes, it is." She held my stare for a long moment, then turned away without another word. She climbed into the rental van, slammed the door, and sped off down the street. That was the last time I ever saw Karren. A few months later, I heard from a former HOA board member that she had moved to another state. Apparently, she had tried to apply for a similar position there, but the news article about her past had followed her. She was rejected immediately. With her gone, the neighborhood continued to improve. The new HOA board was transparent, fair, and focused on actual community improvement rather than control. People started participating in meetings not out of obligation or fear, but because they genuinely wanted to contribute. And as for me, I finally got to enjoy my home without interference. No more bogus fines, no more ridiculous rules, just peace.